attended my own funeral and discovered what the people closest to me really thought. My name is Robert. I am 52 years old, I live in Austin, Texas, and 2 years ago I faked my death. I want to be precise about this because the circumstances matter, and because faking your death sounds like something from a movie, and what I actually did was something more specific and more human, and considerably less dramatic. I had been diagnosed with a terminal illness at 50 and given an uncertain timeline, and I had made a decision that I later understood was a decision born from fear rather than wisdom. I had decided I wanted to know what people would say about me when I was gone while I still had time to hear it. My attorney helped me arrange what we described to a very small number of people as a memorial service rather than a funeral. My actual death had not occurred, and I had been honest with my attorney and my doctor, and no legal documents had been falsified. What I had done was tell my extended family and colleagues that I had entered a final stage of decline, and that I wanted a celebration of life while I was still present in spirit if not in body, and that I would not be attending in person due to my condition, but that I wanted them to gather. I watched the gathering through a video feed my attorney's assistant had set up under the guise of recording it for me. I watched for 4 hours. I want to tell you what 4 hours of people who believe you are dying saying what they think of you actually contains, because it is not what I had expected. There were genuine expressions of love from people I had not known loved me that clearly. There were awkward silences from people who I had thought were close, and who turned out not to know me well enough to fill silence with anything real. There was a speech by my business partner of 20 years that revealed he had been planning to contest my estate. He mentioned figures and arrangements in a conversation with his wife that the microphone caught, and that told me things about 20 years of professional partnership that I had not known. There was a conversation between 2 of my cousins about money they believed they were about to receive that had nothing to do with grief. There was my daughter giving a speech about who I had been to her that I will carry for the rest of my life regardless of how long that is. I watched 4 hours and I understood that what I had done was something I could not undo. Not the gathering, but the knowledge. You cannot unknow what people say about you when they believe you cannot hear them. I did not reveal myself that day. I told my daughter the truth 3 weeks later. The conversation was one of the most difficult of my life. Not because she was angry, though she was, but because she had spent 3 weeks grieving and the grief had been real, and I had caused it for information I had decided I needed, and that I had not had the right to obtain the way I obtained it. I am still alive. The timeline my doctors gave me has been extended by treatment that has been more effective than initially projected. My daughter and I are closer than we have been in years. The 3 weeks of grief and the conversation that followed it, and the honesty that conversation required produced something between us that I do not think would have existed otherwise. My business partner and I dissolved our partnership. I did not tell him why directly. The figures and the arrangements he had discussed at the gathering were enough for me to understand the partnership clearly, and to act accordingly. I have thought many times about whether what I did was right. I have not arrived at yes. I have arrived at it was what I did, and that the consequences of it have been mine to carry, and that I have been carrying them, and will keep carrying them for whatever time I have left. Update 4 months later. My most recent medical assessment was better than the previous one. My doctor used the word encouraging, which is a word doctors use carefully, and I received it carefully. My daughter came to the appointment with me and she held my hand in the waiting room, and when the doctor said encouraging, she looked at me and I looked at her, and we did not say anything because the room was saying enough. I have not watched the recording of the gathering again. I know where it is. I think about watching it sometimes, and I think about my daughter's speech and about my business partner's conversation, and about the cousins discussing money, and I decide not to watch it, and I make dinner, and I call my daughter, and I use whatever time encouraging means while it means it. My twin sister switched lives with me for 6 months, and our parents did not notice until I told them. My name is Amanda. I am 31 years old. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and 18 months ago I discovered that my identical twin sister had been living my life, attending my job, visiting my apartment, having conversations with my friends, for approximately 6 months while I had been living abroad and while she had told our parents she was traveling for work reasons that did not require explanation. My twin sister's name is Victoria. We are identical in the specific complete way of identical twins. Same voice, same mannerisms, same face from angles that even people who know us well sometimes cannot distinguish. I had been living in London for work for an extended period. Victoria had been in Charlotte and had been, as I understood it, living her own life. What I discovered when I returned home was that several of my friends had had significant conversations with someone they believed was me. Conversations about my feelings, my plans, my relationships that I had not had. My coworker mentioned a lunch we had apparently shared in March during which I had said things about my career plans I had never said. My neighbor mentioned that I had been home several weeks when I was not supposed to be, and had borrowed a cup of sugar, which I thought was charming, and then concerning. I called Victoria. The conversation was 40 minutes long and moved through denial and then partial admission, and then complete admission. Victoria had been lonely. She had been going through a period in her own life that had made her own identity feel insufficient, and she had begun visiting Charlotte as me. Not with malicious intent, she said, more as an experiment that had grown beyond what she had intended. She had spent 6 months visiting my life as though it were available to her the way it had been available to me, and she had not known how to stop once she had started. I told our parents. My mother cried. My father went quiet. Then my father asked how nobody had noticed, and I told him that nobody had noticed because Victoria and I are identical, and because nobody had been looking for the substitution, because nobody had known to look. The answer satisfied him factually and not emotionally, and I think that is the appropriate response to a fact that is factually clear and emotionally complicated. Victoria and I are in a different place than we were 18 months ago. Not estranged. I want to be honest about that because Victoria is my twin, and the specific bond of that is not something that a 6-month identity substitution fully severs. But different. We are in therapy together. A family therapist who specializes in twin dynamics, and who has helped us examine what the substitution was about, and what Victoria needed that she had not known how to ask for, and what I need from a relationship with my sister that involves my identity remaining fully mine. The friends and the coworker, and the neighbor have all been told. Their responses range from amused to unsettled to one specific friend who said she had known something was off, but had not been able to identify what and who felt retrospectively better about her own perception. I am back in Charlotte full-time. Victoria has her own life and her own apartment and her own conversations. When we are together, people still sometimes look between us and ask how to tell us apart. We tell them that we can always tell us apart. I think that is probably the most important thing we have learned from all of this. Update. 3 months later. Victoria came to a gathering with my friends last month. As herself, introduced as my twin. Occupying her own space in a room of people, some of whom had met her as me. It was careful and a little awkward and real in the way that things are real, when they have to earn their way to normal rather than start there. One of my friends told Victoria afterward that she had seemed like someone she would like to know. Victoria came and told me this because she was pleased and because sharing it with me was her first instinct, which I think means something. I told her I was glad. I meant it in a way that was complicated and complete and mostly glad. I found out the man I had been dating for 8 months was my long-lost biological brother. My name is Sarah. I am 29 years old. I live in Seattle, Washington, and 14 months ago I received a DNA test result that ended a relationship and restructured my understanding of my own family in the space of a single afternoon. I had been adopted at birth. I had known this from childhood and had always had a comfortable relationship with the fact. My adoptive parents were wonderful and my life had been good, and my curiosity about my biological origins had been moderate rather than consuming. I had submitted a DNA sample to a consumer genetics company 2 years ago out of general curiosity, and had received a broad ancestry breakdown, and a list of distant cousin matches that I had looked at once and not pursued. The man I had been dating for 8 months was named Michael. We had met through mutual friends, and had been together in what I had believed was a good and building relationship. Michael had also, apparently, submitted a DNA sample to the same consumer genetics company some time before we met. I had not known this. He had not known I had. The genetics company updated its matching algorithm 14 months ago, and the update produced a new match in my results that I had not seen before. The match was classified as a close family member. The confidence level was high. The name in the match was Michael's. I want to tell you what it feels like to open a DNA app on a Tuesday afternoon and see the name of the person you have been dating for 8 months listed as a close family match, because I do not think this experience has been adequately described anywhere I have been able to find. It feels like the floor has become a different texture than it was 30 seconds ago. I called Michael. I asked him if he had submitted a DNA sample to the company. He said yes years ago. Why? I told him what I was looking at. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said send me a screenshot. I sent the screenshot. He called me back 12 minutes later. He had been looking at his own results. The match was in his too. We are biological siblings. Full siblings, same biological mother, same biological father, place for adoption separately, both in Seattle, meeting through mutual friends 8 months before a DNA algorithm update connected our results. The relationship ended immediately and completely, and without drama, because the ending was not a choice, it was a fact, and facts of that magnitude do not require deliberation. We spent the following months in separate therapy and in careful coordination through a counselor who specialized in exactly this category of situation, which exists as a documented phenomenon called genetic sexual attraction, and which our counselor was careful to explain and contextualize in ways that helped both of us understand what had happened without either of us carrying it as something that had been our fault. Our biological mother is alive. We have both made contact with her separately, and she has been, by both our accounts, someone who carries the weight of the adoption decisions she made with a honesty that I respect. I have not met Michael in person since the algorithm update. We have exchanged 7 messages through the counselor's facilitated process. The messages have been careful and honest, and have established that we are both okay, and that okay is the right destination for now. Update 4 months later. Michael and I met for coffee last month. First time in person since everything. We sat across from each other for 2 hours and talked about our adoptive families and our lives and the specific strange geography of 2 people who share biological parents and a city, and 8 months of a relationship they did not know was something else. It was not comfortable, and it was not uncomfortable. It was specific in a way that I do not have better language for. When we left, he said he was glad we had met, even given everything, and I said I was too, and I meant it in the full complicated way that everything contains. We have agreed to have coffee once a month. I do not know what we are to each other yet. I think once a month coffee while we figure it out is the right pace and the right amount of space, and that figuring it out is something we are doing together, which is better than doing it alone. I was fired for stealing. The thief was my manager, who had been using my login credentials for 18 months. My name is James. I am 37 years old. I live in Phoenix, Arizona. And 16 months ago I was called into an HR meeting and told I was being terminated for theft. Specifically for a pattern of fraudulent expense submissions totaling approximately $34,000 that had been submitted through our company's expense system using my login credentials over an 18-month period. I had not submitted those expenses. I had not known those expenses existed. I had not stolen $34,000 from my employer. My manager had. His name is Craig. He had been my direct supervisor for 3 years, and he had obtained my login credentials through a combination of watching me enter them over my shoulder over several months, and a fake IT request he had sent me asking me to confirm my credentials for a system update, a request I had complied with because it had looked like every other IT request I had received, and because I had not known I needed to be suspicious of my own manager. Craig had used my credentials to submit fraudulent expenses for 18 months. He had been careful about amounts and timing in ways that suggested he had thought about what would and would not trigger an audit. What had triggered the audit was not Craig's pattern, but a company-wide expense review that had flagged my total submissions as anomalous against my role and salary level. The audit had found $34,000 in fraudulent submissions. The submissions had been made through my login. HR had called me into a meeting and terminated me without asking me a single question about whether I had made the submissions. I had been walked out of the building before I had fully understood what I was being accused of. I called my attorney Patricia from the parking lot. Patricia told me to document everything before I did anything else, every memory of every unusual request, every IT email I had received, every occasion on which Craig had been near my workstation. I spent 3 days documenting. On the 4th day I remembered the fake IT request. I found it in my email archive. It was still there. The sending address was Craig's personal email account constructed to look like our company's IT department domain. A domain spoofing attempt that had fooled me in the moment, and that looked obviously wrong in retrospect when I was looking for it. Patricia sent a letter to the company on day 5. The letter identified the email, the spoofed domain, and a request for the full access logs of my credentials during the relevant 18-month period. The company's investigation took 3 weeks. The access logs showed that the fraudulent expense submissions had been made from IP addresses that were not mine, specifically from Craig's work computer and, on several occasions, from an IP address that traced to his home network. Craig was arrested. He was charged with wire fraud, identity theft, and computer fraud. His case was resolved through a plea agreement that required full restitution to the company. My termination was reversed. The company offered me my position back with back pay for the period of my termination. I accepted the back pay. I declined the position because I had spent 3 weeks understanding how my employer had terminated me without asking me a single question about expenses I had allegedly submitted, and that level of due process failure was not something I wanted to continue my career inside. I am at a different company now. My new company has a security policy that includes mandatory credential hygiene training that I paid attention to with a focus that my colleagues probably found excessive. It was not excessive. It was exactly sufficient. Update 4 months later. Craig's restitution payments began last month. My attorney confirmed that the civil judgment against him for my wrongful termination damages was also being satisfied through a payment plan. The total recovery between the back pay, the wrongful termination settlement, and the civil judgment was more than I had made in the 18 months of Craig's fraud. I do not find this satisfying in the way I expected to find it satisfying. I find it accurate. The number reflects what was taken and what it cost, and accuracy is the appropriate outcome, even when it does not produce the feeling you anticipated. My new company gave me a performance review last month that described my attention to security protocols as exemplary. I thanked my manager and did not explain why I was so attentive to them. Some lessons are yours to carry without explaining where they came from. I discovered my husband's entire career for the past 12 years had been a fabrication. He had never had the job he told me he had. My name is Linda. I am 44 years old. I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and 10 months ago I discovered that my husband of 12 years had not been employed at the company he had told me he worked at for the entirety of our marriage. He had never worked there. The company existed. He had not worked there. My husband's name is Thomas. He was 47 years old. He had told me he was a senior financial analyst at a regional firm when we met and had maintained this identity. The hours, the colleagues, the office politics, the promotions, the salary, for 12 years of marriage with a consistency and a detail that I still find extraordinary to think about. He had left the house every morning at 8:15. He had come home between 5:30 and 6:30. He had attended what he described as work functions. He had received what I believed were paychecks into our joint account. I had never had a reason to verify any of it. Why would I? I found out because the firm he had told me he worked at was mentioned in a news article about an acquisition, and I had sent Thomas the article with a note saying, "Have you heard about this?" And he had called me within 3 minutes in a way that told me the article had produced something in him before he had been able to manage it. He said he had heard about it, and changed the subject in a way that I registered and filed. That evening I went to the firm's website and looked at their staff directory. His name was not there. I looked through their LinkedIn page. His profile listed the firm as his employer, but the firm's own page did not list him as an employee. I searched his name and the firm's name together. Nothing official came up. I looked at the paychecks that had been depositing to our joint account for 12 years. The deposits came from a business account in Thomas's name that I had known about, because Thomas had told me it was his company's payroll processing account for contractor payments. The account was funded by transfers from an account I had not known about. I hired a forensic accountant named Howard. Howard spent 2 weeks going through 12 years of our finances. What Howard found was that Thomas had been self-employed for the entirety of our marriage, running a small investment and consulting practice that had been, by Howard's assessment, modestly profitable, and had been routing the income through the business account and into our joint account while maintaining the fiction of salaried employment at a firm he had never worked at. He had not been hiding money. He had not been committing fraud against me financially. The money had been real and had been ours. What he had been hiding was his actual professional identity, and the specific anxiety about its sufficiency that had apparently been present from before we met, and that had produced a fabrication he had then been unable to exit. I confronted Thomas with Howard's report. He told me everything. The fiction had begun before we met. He had been a self-employed consultant who had believed that saying so would not be enough to build a relationship, and had constructed the analyst identity as a presentation, and had then been unable to correct it once the relationship had become serious, and then had been married inside the fiction for 12 years. He had told himself the money was real and the life was real, and that the specific company name had been a detail that had grown beyond what he had intended when he first said it. I am still married to Thomas. I want to be honest about the complexity of that sentence. The marriage I am in now is not the marriage I believed I was in for 12 years, but it is a marriage in which I know who Thomas actually is. A self-employed consultant who is genuinely good at his work, and who has been carrying a 12-year deception because he had not believed his actual self was enough. Our therapist says that what Thomas did was a form of profound insecurity expressed over an extraordinary time frame, and that the insecurity rather than the deception is the thing that requires the work. I think both require the work. We are doing both. Update: 4 months later. Thomas updated his LinkedIn profile last month. His actual employment history, 12 years of self-employment, specific to what he actually does, is now publicly visible for the first time. He showed me the updated profile and I looked at it, and I thought about 12 years of a different profile, and about the specific courage it takes to replace a fabrication with a truth that you have been afraid of for longer than the fabrication has existed. I told him it looked good. He said it felt strange to have it accurate. I said I thought strange and accurate was better than comfortable and false, and he said he thought so too. We had dinner. His actual job is interesting. I have been learning about it for 4 months, and finding it more interesting than the job I thought he had for 12 years.